Crows surround German Shepherd puppy. What happens next will shock you. The tiny German Shepherd puppy lay helpless in the dirt, his frail body barely able to move. His once soft fur was matted with mud, his stomach painfully empty, and his legs too weak to stand. His breathing was uneven, small whimpers escaping his throat as he struggled to lift his head. But there was no one around to hear him, no comforting hands to scoop him up, no familiar scent of warmth and safety. He was alone in an open field, abandoned, left to fend for himself in a world too cruel for a creature so small. His body ached, but it was the silence that terrified him the most. The wind had stopped, the rustling of grass had faded, and even the distant hum of nature seemed to have vanished. The air was unnaturally still, thick with something invisible yet heavy. His tiny ears twitched, sensing something in the distance. Something was wrong. Then, a sound cut through the silence like a knife. A sharp, eerie caw. The puppy flinched, his heart thudding weakly in his fragile chest. His eyes darted around, scanning the horizon. The field stretched endlessly, but his gaze was drawn to movement in the distance. Shadows flickered, shifting against the dimming light of the sky. Another caw, then another, and suddenly he saw them. At first, they were perched on the old, weathered fence nearby, their black feathers blending with the darkening sky. A dozen pairs of sharp, beady eyes glistened in the fading light, locked onto him like silent judges. Their movements were unerringly synchronized, heads tilting in unison, claws gripping the wood tightly. Then they began to move. One by one, they took flight, their wings slicing through the air as they swooped down. Their sharp talons barely grazed the ground as they landed around him, surrounding his tiny form in a perfect, eerie circle. The puppy whimpered, trying to push himself up, but his legs gave out beneath him. The crows stood motionless. They didn't scavenge, didn't peck at the ground. They just watched. The puppy's breath quickened. Were they waiting for something? Why weren't they attacking? He had seen birds like these before, fighting over scraps of food, diving down to snatch whatever they could find. But this was different. This felt deliberate. His little body trembled as he curled his tail inward, instinctively trying to make himself smaller. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing: he was trapped. The silence stretched, making every second feel endless. Then a single crow broke formation. Larger than the rest, its dark wings spread slightly as it hopped forward. Its sharp black eyes locked onto the defenseless pup, unblinking. It cocked its head, as if studying him, calculating something beyond the understanding of a mere animal. The puppy's breath hitched. His body froze. Then, without warning, the crow lunged. The puppy yelped, squeezing his eyes shut, bracing for the sharp sting of talons digging into his fur. But instead of an attack, there was a sudden, unexpected thud. His eyes flickered open, confused. The crow hadn't hurt him. It had pecked at the ground right next to his paw. Then, another crow joined in, raking its beak through the dirt with quick, precise movements. And then another. The puppy blinked. What were they doing? A loud rustling noise came from the tall grass behind him. Every crow froze. Their heads all turned at once, their sharp eyes locked onto something beyond the puppy's view. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen tension. Then, a deep, low growl rumbled from the shadows. Something else was here. Something that made the crows react like this. The puppy wasn't just in danger. He was being hunted. The eerie stillness in the air grew heavier as the crows continued their unsettling display. Instead of attacking the helpless puppy, they moved with an almost calculated precision, raking their sharp beaks through the dirt, scratching and digging. It was as if they were looking for something, or perhaps trying to reveal something hidden beneath the soil. Their black feathers shimmered under the fading sunlight, and their heads moved in perfect unison, tilting at the same time, their eyes fixed on the same unseen point beyond the puppy. One crow, the largest of them all, let out a deep, guttural caw. Immediately, the others stilled. Their attention snapped toward the tall grass swaying gently behind the puppy. The wind had died down moments ago, yet the grass moved unnaturally, as if something large was lurking just out of sight. The crows seemed to know something the puppy didn't. They weren't just watching anymore. They were warning him. A sharp chill ran down the puppy's spine. He didn't understand what was happening, but every instinct in his tiny body screamed at him to move, to run. His weak legs trembled as he tried to push himself up, but exhaustion kept him pinned to the ground. His breathing quickened, small whimpers escaping his throat as his wide eyes darted between the unmoving crows and the rustling grass. Then the sound came again, a deep guttural growl, low, menacing, and far too close. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the crows. Something was there, hidden just beyond the tall stalks. Watching, waiting. The puppy's ears flattened, his tiny body shrinking into itself. He wasn't just scared, he felt something else. A strange sense of being trapped. Like the crows knew what was coming. Like they were preparing for something far worse than him. Then, as if on cue, the large crow flapped its wings and let out a piercing caw. A sound so sharp, so commanding, that the entire murder of crows erupted into flight. Black wings filled the air in a sudden, chaotic frenzy, sending a storm of feathers and dust swirling around the puppy. The force of their takeoff nearly knocked him over as he cowered against the ground. But their departure wasn't random. It wasn't an escape. They were charging toward something. High up on a hill overlooking the field, a man had been watching the strange sight unfold through a pair of old binoculars. He had been passing by, a simple evening stroll through the countryside, when the unnatural silence caught his attention. At first, he thought nothing of the crows, after all, they were scavengers. But the way they had surrounded that lone puppy, their calculated movements, their eerie stillness, something felt off. Then he saw the moment they took flight. Not in fear, not in retreat, but in attack. His grip on the binoculars tightened. His eyes scanned the field, following the crow's trajectory. And then he saw it. Something was moving in the tall grass. Something big. The man's heart pounded in his chest. Whatever was lurking there, it wasn't supposed to be this close to town. Without another second of hesitation, he turned and ran toward the field. The field was no longer silent. The chaotic beating of wings and the sharp cries of crows filled the air as they charged toward the rustling grass. The puppy remained frozen in place, his tiny body shaking as his eyes darted between the rising storm of black feathers and the looming threat hidden in the shadows. Then, in one heart-stopping moment, the real danger stepped into the open. A massive coyote emerged from the tall grass, its yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Its mangy fur bristled as it lowered its head, lips peeling back to reveal long, sharp teeth. The poor puppy, weak and exhausted, was an easy target, a meal too tempting for the predator to ignore. The coyote took a slow, deliberate step forward, muscles tensing as it prepared to pounce. A low growl rumbled from its throat, sending fresh waves of terror through the helpless puppy. His small paws dug into the dirt, but his legs refused to move. His body was frozen, trapped between instinct and fear. The man racing down the hill saw everything. His breath caught in his throat. He had expected something, maybe a stray dog, maybe even a fox, but not this. Coyotes were smart, cautious creatures. They rarely ventured this close to human settlements unless desperation pushed them beyond their fear of people. Something about this situation wasn't normal. The coyote wasn't just hunting, it was stalking. It had been waiting in the grass, patient and calculated, as if testing the situation before making its move. It wasn't simply passing through. It had been watching the entire time. And now it had decided to strike. The man quickened his pace, shouting as loud as he could in a desperate attempt to scare the predator off. But he was too far. He wouldn't reach the puppy in time. And that's when the crows did something no one expected. Before the coyote could lunge, the murder of crows attacked. A deafening explosion of black feathers and sharp beaks rained down on the predator with terrifying precision. The air filled with the sound of enraged cawing as dozens of crows dove at the coyote, pecking at its face, clawing at its eyes, ripping at its fur. The largest crow, the one that had first sounded the alarm, swooped down with incredible speed, its razor-sharp beak striking directly at the coyote's snout. The predator yelped in pain, shaking its head violently as it tried to fend off the relentless swarm. It snapped its jaws at the birds, but the crows were too fast, too agile. They attacked from all angles, forcing the coyote backward, away from the terrified puppy. The man stopped in his tracks, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. He had seen birds act aggressively before, but never like this. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. The crows weren't simply defending their territory, they were protecting the puppy. The coyote let out a snarl, its patience finally breaking. Blood dripped from its snout where the lead crow had struck. With a final, furious snap at the air, the predator realized it had lost the fight. It let out a frustrated growl, turned, and bolted back into the tall grass. But the crows weren't done yet. Even as the coyote fled, the birds pursued it, diving and striking to ensure it didn't dare return. They chased it deep into the field, disappearing into the golden sea of grass until the only sound left was the fading rustle of the wind. And just like that, it was over. The puppy remained frozen on the ground, his little chest rising and falling in rapid, frightened breaths. His wide, innocent eyes stayed fixed on the place where the coyote had vanished, as if he couldn't believe he was still alive. The lead crow circled above him one last time before landing on a nearby rock, its sharp eyes studying the trembling pup. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it let out one final caw, a sound that almost felt like reassurance. The man finally reached the puppy, bending down to gently scoop the fragile creature into his arms. He could still feel the puppy's rapid heartbeat against his palm. His gaze lifted toward the crows, now perched on the fence posts, watching him with silent intensity. He had always thought of crows as ominous, as scavengers waiting for the weak to fall. But tonight they had done something else. Something no one would ever believe unless they had seen it with their own eyes. Tonight, the crows had become the puppy's saviors. As the dust settled and the coyote disappeared into the distance, a profound silence fell over the field. The puppy, still curled up on the ground, stared wide-eyed at the black-winged figures perched on the fence posts. For the first time, the fear in his tiny body began to fade, replaced by something else, a sense of safety. The man, cradling the trembling puppy in his arms, turned his gaze toward the crows. He had seen it all, the relentless attack, the precise coordination, and the way they had chased off the predator. This wasn't random aggression. The crows hadn't been waiting to feast on the weak. They had been protecting the defenseless pup. It was a realization that sent a chill down his spine. He had always heard stories about crows being intelligent, even capable of forming deep connections, but this was something else entirely. It was as if the birds had recognized the puppy's vulnerability and chosen to intervene, understanding the danger before anyone else had. The lead crow, the one that had sounded the alarm and struck the coyote's snout with precision, tilted its head slightly as it observed the man. Its sharp, calculating eyes seemed to hold an unspoken message. Was it curiosity? Was it a warning? Or was it something even deeper, a silent acknowledgement? From a distance, a faint rustling in the tall grass signaled the coyote's full retreat. It wouldn't be coming back. The attack had cost it too much, wounded pride, sharp pecks to its face, and a newfound fear of the winged guardians that had driven it away. Still, the crows didn't move. They kept their watchful eyes on the field, ensuring the predator had truly left before breaking formation. One by one, the birds let out a series of short, deliberate calls, almost like a conversation among themselves. And then, in a synchronized motion, they took flight. The man watched as the dark wings beat against the fading light of the setting sun, their silhouettes forming an almost eerie yet majestic sight against the sky. But before the last crow followed the others, the leader remained. It perched on the fence, staring directly at the man and the puppy in his arms. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it let out a final, deep caw, not one of warning, but of closure. And with that, it spread its wings and disappeared into the sky. The man looked down at the puppy nestled against his chest. The little creature had finally stopped shaking, its warm body now relaxed in his hands. For the first time since he had stumbled upon the scene, the puppy let out a soft, contented sigh. The crows were gone, but their presence lingered in the air, almost as if they had left behind something intangible. A sense of protection, of understanding. The man couldn't shake the thought that this was more than just a random event. The crows had acted with purpose, with intelligence beyond instinct. They had chosen to save a life. As he walked away with the puppy safe in his arms, he couldn't help but glance back one last time at the empty fence where the lead crow had been. He had always thought of crows as mysterious, even eerie creatures. But now, as the last echoes of their calls faded into the wind, he understood. Sometimes the most unexpected protectors come in the darkest of feathers. The warmth of the man's hands seemed to lull the puppy into a state of peaceful exhaustion. No longer trembling, no longer afraid, the tiny German shepherd nestled closer to his chest, its heartbeat steadying against the man's own. He could feel the rise and fall of the pup's fragile body, a life that had nearly been lost, saved by the most unexpected heroes. He walked toward his truck, each step heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. He had arrived expecting to witness a tragedy, yet now he was leaving with something entirely different, a second chance. He gently placed the pup on the passenger seat, wrapping him in a soft blanket he had in the back. The little one looked up at him, eyes no longer filled with terror but with something softer, trust. Before starting the engine, the man let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He turned his gaze back toward the field, where just moments ago, a battle for life had unfolded. The crows were gone now, their dark forms nothing more than fading shadows in the distance. But he knew they had been here for a reason. As he drove home, his mind replayed every detail of what had happened. If he had come just a minute later, would the coyote have succeeded? If the crows hadn't intervened, would the puppy have stood a chance? He had always thought of crows as ominous creatures, bringers of bad luck, scavengers of the weak. But today they had rewritten that belief entirely. They hadn't gathered to prey on the helpless. They had gathered to protect. It struck him then, how often do we misjudge things based on what we think we know? How many times do we assume darkness where there is actually light? People feared crows because of old superstitions, because of the way they loomed in the sky like silent watchers. But today they had been more than just birds. They had been guardians. And that puppy, once abandoned and left to fend for itself, had found protection not in human hands first, but in the wings of the unexpected. It was a lesson he would never forget. The puppy, whom he later named Shadow, grew strong in the months that followed. With each passing day, the fear that once filled the pup's tiny frame faded, replaced by the playful energy of a dog who had found not just survival, but love. And yet, there were moments, quiet, still moments, when Shadow would stop in his tracks, ears perking up at the sky. His amber eyes would scan the treetops, and sometimes, just sometimes, a familiar black-winged figure would be there. The man had witnessed it more than once. A crow perched on a branch near their home, watching silently. It never lingered for long, never demanded attention. But it was always there, as if to remind them of that fateful day in the field. The man often wondered, was it the same crow? He would never know for sure. But every time he saw those dark wings against the sky, he smiled. Because now, he understood something he never had before. Sometimes, the greatest protectors don't come in armor. Sometimes, they come with wings and a piercing caw, watching over us in ways we may never fully comprehend.